Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry, a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, guys, we're coming back with another oversimplified inspired video. And this is from a channel that previously did a video on if Hitler actually went to Argentina. And the channel is Things I Care About. And keeping on with the German theme, this video is titled The German Revolution. All right, this original video is going to be down below. It's a new channel, so let's get the support needed over there. So click that link down below to go to the original video, view, like, subscribe, all those things that support a channel. All right, I hope we can have some fun with this and let's learn a little bit too. All right, this says part 1. I don't know if a part 2 is out yet. I'll have to check, and then of course let me know if you want me to continue it and do a part 2. All right, let's check this out.
You've heard of the French Revolution. You've heard about the Russian Revolution. But have you heard about the
Russian
German Revolution? Filled with intrigue, treachery, and coup after coup after coup, where dreams of a socialist utopia turned into a fascist dystopia.
Oversimplified.
Welcome to the craziest revolution of them all.
I looked down in the description. It said he's heavily influenced, obviously, by Oversimplified and also like Bill Word's History of the World. I mean, the goats. I'm going to turn off the captions. You can turn them on yourself back on this video that you're watching of me if you want to.
In 1914, a certain Austro-Hungarian Archduke wanted to see if it was possible for him to go for a drive around Sarajevo and not get assassinated. It was not, and the world was...
Yeah, that didn't work out very well, did it? That is going to start the whole kind of snowball. Well, I should say, that's why I like the powder keg thing. Explodes into World War I, of course. He's going into Sarajevo as Austria-Hungary occupied Bosnia, a place that did not like being occupied by Austria-Hungary, literally going into a lion's den of people that hate him for, you know, PR, try to improve relations, and that backfired.
Was flung into World War I. In Germany, political parties overwhelmingly supported the war. Even the Socialist Party, who were supposed to be anti-war, supported it because they viewed the Russian Empire as the biggest anti-socialist power in Europe. The war was supposed to be over by Christmas.
Isn't that ironic how Russia just completely transforms from this brutal monarchy and then, you know, anti-socialist, right? And then just flip it just on its head into a communist revolution.
But it dragged on, and by 1916 there was still no end in sight. In the front lines, hundreds of thousands of Germans had already fallen.
Dying with nothing to
back
show
home,
for it, huh?
The economy crumbled.
Makes sense.
There had been no preparations done for a long-time war. Skilled workers and farmers had been sent to the front, and all matters, political, military, and economic, fell upon the army generals Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, who were determined to achieve victory at any cost and subjugated civilian life to the needs of the war efforts. What this meant for workers was 12-hour workdays at minimal wages and insufficient food.
So World War I could be considered a term we use called total war. It's when entire countries' resources are utilized for the war effort. The war effort is so large that it requires, doesn't matter if you're on the front lines or not, like the government has to prioritize the war, the economy is prioritized for the war, and even people back at home. You may not be out fighting in the front lines, but there's a good chance you are doing something to provide the war effort. And at the very, very, very least, right, you're expected to do things like ration food and oil. Like, you are involved in the war, whether you like it or not.
It cannot be overstated how much of an impact the war had in the German population. Just in 1916, 250,000 Germans died due to starvation or disease related to lack of food. In these dire conditions, a group of socialists led by a woman called Rosa Luxemburg openly defied the continuation of the war and founded the Spartacus League. As the war continued, more and more people joined the Spartakists. Why should we support the war? It is clearly an imperialist war driven entirely by capitalist control of the world market for the political domination of huge territories and to give scope to industrial and banking capital. My brother in Christ, I just asked for the time. And to be fair, they were right about the economic interest that caused the war.
Yeah, so yeah, the conditions of World War I, why it started and how it was going, was perfect fodder for socialists to use that to market their ideologies, because obviously anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and they think those are the things that are funding this war, and why the socialist movements were so popular in many countries. right? And not just in Europe. We're going to see in Asia. Sure, you're going to see the socialist movement be as strong as it ever was in the United States at this time.
And people across Germany were beginning to see it. The movement continued to grow and spread across factories in Germany, with workers going on continuous strikes, until in June 1916, the emperor had two of the most important anti-war socialist leaders, Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, sentenced to prison. However, it was too little, too late. Hungry, tired and angry workers were beginning to identify more and more with socialist ideals and started to demand change. The emperor tried to appease the population by promising democratic elections in Prussia after the war ended. The Socialist Party became divided.
Remember, that did not exist. Okay, they were still a monarchy, right? Didn't have the deep democratic reforms that other countries had at that time. But World War I, as you remember, if you might remember, is kind of the beginning of the end for pretty much monarchy in Europe, at least ones that can be close to absolute monarchies.
Some wanted to continue the war and find reforms afterwards through elections. Others wanted an immediate end to the war, to the monarchy, and even demanded the proclamation of a socialist republic. The SPD split. The first group turned into the majority SPD and the second to the independent SPD, who joined forces with the Spartakists. The war took a turn for the better on March 3rd, 1918, when Russia officially surrendered, and a wave of patriotism swept through Germany as the Supreme Command could now move part of the Eastern armies to the Western Front. Many Germans truly believed that victory in the West was now at hand.
A lot of people thought that, right? When Russia bails out of the war, I mean, it's been a stalemate on the Western Front because Germany has not been able to put their full effort out in the West. And based off of just that alone, fighting with the Germans, fighting against the, because the Americans aren't fighting yet, right? Against the British and the French and any other resistance movements. Pretty incredible that they were able to hold a stalemate for years just doing that. And now when it flipped, yeah, you better believe that's what people thought. And those countries are going to definitely want help. The United States is going to join in, and that was very timely.
Here you must keep in mind that news were highly manipulated. Newspapers reported only of victories, and defeats,
totally controlled by the government and military
were
at that
described
time.
as tactical maneuvers, so the average German had a distorted sense of the state of the war.
The height of propaganda.
But reality was catching up.
Well, people were starting to realize that what propaganda was, because like I said, it was very much controlled by powerful people, the government, military, and stuff like that. And the narrative that people at home received in the newspaper was not accurate, specifically because it would often talk about how well the war was going for that country, and it wasn't, and people were disillusioned by that.
In September, the Balkan Front collapsed, and the Kingdom of Bulgaria, ally of Germany, capitulated. Austria-Hungary collapsed a few days later. Germany too was on the brink of defeat. During the Allied 100-day offensive between August and November 1918, they suffered defeat after defeat after defeat.
All right, petition, please. I think I've said this in videos before. When you make maps, the water can't be the darkest color. It's confusing. It's confusing.
Fearing the inevitable, Generals Ludendorff and Hindenburg sent a representative to negotiate an armistice. American President Woodrow Wilson demanded as a precondition for surrender negotiations the retreat of Germany from all occupied territories, the cessation of submarine activities, and implicitly the emperor's abdication. With this demand, he intended to render the process of democratization irreversible. On September 29th, the Supreme Army Command informed the Emperor Wilhelm II that the military situation was hopeless. Give it to me straight, Ludendorff. How bad is it? I'm not gonna lie, it is very, very bad. I don't think we can hold the front for another 24 hours. We should request an immediate ceasefire. No way! The American president said he would only grant one if I abdicate. And you should. What?
He does.
Whose side are you on? Mein Kaiser, if you abdicate, we can blame the defeat on the socialists for protesting. Then, once the armies are back in Germany, we will use them to retake power.
I wanted to plug an idea that I've had that I don't think will ever happen. I don't know. But years ago, people were telling me I should make a podcast. My podcast idea was Hot Tub History, where it would be interviews with like historians and stuff, and we'd be in a hot tub, but it wouldn't be flattering because we're all like older guys, probably not in very good shape. It wouldn't be very visually pleasing. I think it would essentially look like this. We know you think of the hot tub history idea.
This was the birth of the stab in the back legend. The false belief that revolutionaries had undermined, sabotaged, and attacked the undefeated German army from the rear.
And if you're Adolf Hitler, it's also the Jews that are doing this,
Turning an almost certain victory into defeat. However, 8 out of the 10 socialist leaders just happened to be Jewish, and quickly the conspiracy theory went from targeting socialists to including Jews as responsible for the German defeat. With 2.7 million dead, there were few families untouched in Germany, and people were bitter. In October 1918,
Scapegoat
over
time.
1 million workers striked throughout Germany.
War will be
Tired
over
of
in a
the old
month.
regime, they formed councils or Räte after the Russian Soviets, seeking to establish their own socialist republic. But the leader of the
Movement's
MSPD,
growing.
Friedrich Ebert, looking to weaken the influence of the Soviets, negotiated an early termination of the strike. The emperor abdicated, and Ebert considered the continuation of the revolution to be unnecessary. On October 24th, General Ludendorff changed his mind and declared the conditions of the Allies to be unacceptable. He now demanded the resumption of the war that he had declared lost only 1 month earlier. However, he did not have the support he expected and fled to Sweden with false papers.
Of course not. They wanted the soldiers, everyone wanted the war to be over, except for a handful of military leaders. I mean, that's it. You have no, and with the war and how it's going by October 1918, the Germans have no leverage. There's no leverage anymore.
But while most Germans prepared for peace, the Imperial Naval Command in Kiel planned to dispatch the Imperial fleet for a last battle against the Royal Navy. The British think we are about to surrender, so this is the perfect time to attack. Any questions? Did the High Command authorize the attack? Not quite.
They just
but
start acting
Admiral,
on their own.
The new government is engaged in peace negotiations.
Exactly.
Wouldn't an attack
Stop.
undermine them? Okay, no more questions. Just raise the anchor. We're moving.
I mean, they would be literal, like, until they physically, it was signed and shown to the leaders, even though they knew the negotiations were happening, there were leaders like this that were still like, no, we're fighting. We're fighting. Even though everyone knows the negotiations are happening. Like, nope, we're going to fight. It's at 11 a.m., which is like the deal that they made on November 18th. Was like, okay, nope, we're fighting till 10:59 and 90 and at 59 seconds. 10:59, 59. Did I say 10:99? Sorry. Time. What it meant is the last second, literal last second. No. Yeah, exactly. No.
Well, that's just rude.
What are you gonna do about it?
Sailors on board 3 ships
What are you gonna do?
refused to weigh anchors.
Copium.
Some committed outright mutiny and sabotage.
Yeet.
They were arrested
Yeet.
without
Whoa.
resistance and imprisoned in Kiel. Still, they achieved their goal. The Naval Command had to drop its plans for a naval engagement.
Did they get?
On November
Anyone know if with that group specifically, if they got released like soon?
1st,
Let me know down below.
hundreds of sailors joined forces with the socialists to
The
demand
Spartacus
an
guys.
immediate release of the prisoners. Raising slogans of peace and bread, they also demanded the end of the war and the improvement of food provisions. More and more people joined the protesters as they moved toward the military prison. Sub-Lieutenant Steinhäuser ordered his patrol to fire warning shots and then to shoot directly into the demonstration. 7 people were killed and 29 severely injured. Some demonstrators returned fire,
Sounds
and
like
the mass
early
protest
Russian
turned
Revolution,
into a
huh?
general revolt. The governor of the naval station was compelled to negotiate the release of the prisoners.
They got
By
right
the
out.
evening of
Never
November
mind.
4th, Kiel was firmly in the rebels' hand. Delegations of sailors dispersed to all the major cities in Germany. By November 7th, the revolution had seized all large coastal
War's over in
cities,
4
as
days.
well as Hanover, Brunswick, Frankfurt am Main, and Munich. Workers and soldiers formed councils, and by the end of the month, all 22 German monarchs had been dethroned. But apart from the dynastic families, the councils deprived...
German political system was so whack. I mean, it goes back to like Holy Roman Empire stuff where it's like, okay, who's actually in charge? Everyone's a king. You're a king, and you're a king, and you're a king.
only the military command of their power and privilege. They did not interfere with the duties of police, municipal administrations, and courts. There were hardly any confiscation of property or occupation of factories,
Money
because
bags,
such
whatever his
measures
name
were
is.
expected from the new government. Hoping to gain over the middle-class parties and old elites of the
done.
German Empire, and fearing a radicalization of the revolution that could lead to a civil war, Ebert, the leader of the majority Socialist Party, met with the leaders of the old regime. They reached an agreement,
guys.
and Ebert was made chancellor.
The leader of
Karl
capitalism.
Liebknecht, recently released from prison, returned to Berlin and planned to proclaim Germany a socialist republic.
He's got
SPD
just the way even he looks. Doesn't he totally got Trotsky vibes?
Deputy Chairman Philipp Scheidemann heard about this and immediately stepped out a balcony of the Reichstag and proclaimed Germany a democratic republic in front of demonstrators. This upset Ebert, who wished to leave the choice of political system to a national assembly. Just hours
What the
later,
F, bro?
Liebknecht proclaimed that Germany was now a socialist republic and
Oh,
called for elections to
everyone's-
form the Council of People's Deputies.
I declare bankruptcy. Everyone's just declaring stuff with no actual power or authority or influence.
Who on November 11th signed the armistice that officially ended
11-11-11.
World War I. The new government passed the 8-hour workday and severely strengthened worker unions. They expanded social insurance, unemployment benefits, and worker compensations, while working on a series of projects to improve health insurance and housing availability.
By the way, this is the stuff that you're going to see all over the place. The places where socialist revolutions failed, you will see, you can call it a compromise, as some of the major bottom, lowest of expectations of what the socialist movements, socialists, and union leaders wanted is the stuff you're looking at right here: 8-hour day, etc. And places even that didn't have substantial success in social movements, say like the United States, for example, will at least adopt these reforms, which were again at the bottom of the platform that socialist movements and again unions were advocating for.
In the meantime, the Supreme Command was raising its own paramilitary force, the Freikorps. Paramilitary organizations
always ends well,
operate
right? You
inside
raise your own
Germany.
army.
Many of its members were former soldiers who struggled to readjust to civilian life. They were very nationalistic and ferociously anti-socialist.
You see a lot of this with the early Nazi Party, although they adopt into what they refer to as National Socialism, and root out the stuff they didn't like, right? Like, say, the proclaiming of like racial equality. If you read something like Mein Kampf, you can see how Adolf Hitler, he liked a lot of the labor movements of that, but didn't like, he basically thought these like traditional socialists were not racist enough.
In December, all of Germany's councils were to meet in Berlin to vote on whether to make Germany a council or Soviet republic. Ebert and his government ordered the army to move into Berlin to prevent the convention.
This guy
But
wants
while
neither.
attempting to arrest the council leaders, the soldiers opened fire on unarmed demonstrators who were supporting the convention, killing 16 people.
That never goes well.
Despite the massacre, Ebert's plan to prevent the convention failed. But it was also unnecessary.
It reminds me of like the events that led to the tennis court oath in the French Revolution. It's like, hey, if we stop your convention from happening, I guess you guys can't make a new government, right? And they're like, well, no, we can just do it later.
The convention voted overwhelmingly against the creation of a council system and instead supported Ebert's call for elections to choose a constituent national assembly that would decide upon the state system. During the revolution, an elite regiment, the Revolutionary Guard, had been stationed in Berlin to protect the government. But Ebert now feared that they were getting too friendly with the Spartakists. So on December 23rd, he dismissed them from Berlin and ordered to reduce their members. To force them to comply, the city commander Otto Wels held their pay. The Revolutionary Army seized the Reichschancellery and arrested several members of the government until their salaries were paid.
I just keep getting all these historical like events that remind me of that. It's like the Fourth Crusade when the Crusaders show up to Constantinople and like, all right, we're here to fight. Where's our money? And like, no, there is no money. All right, we're just going to take everything then and occupy.
Chancellor Ebert called upon the army to force them out, attacking them in the skirmish of the Berlin Schloss. However, many of Ebert's soldiers defected, and the Berlin police, led by Emil Eichhorn, refused to act against the revolutionaries. With over 30 dead and 50 wounded, the battle was a clear defeat for Ebert's government, who was forced to pay the sailors and postpone their size reduction.
I want to interject and say this video has actually been really impressive. There's a lot of stuff I'm learning. I know, like, you know, I've learned about like the general movement that kind of happened here, but these details are super fascinating and actually a lot more violent than I thought.
However, the confrontation was a turning point for the Spartakists.
For Germans, I'm
tired
Germans,
of the
SPD,
you know? They left the party and formed the German Communist Party, KPD. On January 4th, 1919, Ebert dismissed police chief Eichhorn for failing to act against revolutionaries and demonstrating workers. Hundreds of thousands took to the streets the very next day, many of them armed. The demonstrators occupied train stations and several newspapers that the previous day had called not only for the raising of more Freikorps, but for the murder of the Spartakists. On January 8th, Ebert decided to use troops stationed in Berlin against the occupiers. They violently quelled an improvised revolt on January 9th, and just a few days later, the Freikorps moved into Berlin. They brutally cleared several buildings and executed the occupiers on the spot.
It's the, lack of any kind of habeas corpus, even a trial at all and all this stuff. It's just straight up martial law.
Freikorps murdered at least 100 workers, even those who surrendered. Just a few days later, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were arrested and delivered to a Freikorps division that beat them up and executed them. The perpetrators of the murders went mostly unpunished. After coming to power, the SPD government had not wiped out the Army Supreme Command or the judiciary. And now, the judges, many longing for a return to the old order, gave right-wing criminals, assassins and terrorists a slap on the wrist for their crimes as long as the victims were either revolutionaries or associated with the new democratic German state. The few people that went to prison for the murder of the Spartacist leaders were later compensated by the Nazi government, and later investigations showed that the murders of Karl and Rosa had been approved by Ebert himself. From this point on, the political differences between the SPD and the KPD became insurmountable, and in following years, they would be unable to work together to stop the rising threat from the Nazi Party. The first elections came shortly after.
Back there.
The SPD became the strongest party and joined with other center parties to form the Weimar coalition. Ebert was elected president. The new Weimar constitution offered more possibilities for a direct democracy by setting up a mechanism for referendums. It also had a simple rule. You gain 60,000 votes, you gain 1 seat in parliament. While this allowed for more representation, it also made it very difficult to build coalitions. In fact, no parties achieved a majority during the 1920s.
That's just asking for corruption to gain seats there, by the way.
There was another massive problem. Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution granted the president the authority to rule against the majority in the Reichstag with the help of the army, if need be. Article 48 would become instrumental in destroying German democracy.
That makes sense.
In Bavaria,
what do you think the reason behind that provision? I mean, it clearly just puts the power leader above the elected officials. That the military basically just answers to the leader and not to the democratic will of the people necessarily.
The USPD, who had political control over the state after the Bavarian king's resignation, suffered a crushing defeat in the elections. Eisner, the Bavarian USPD,
let's look at those results
resignation,
again.
Suffered.
So yeah, a lot of political parties winning. The Bavarian People's Party just going about basically 35%. That's a large percentage of voters spread out. I mean, the Democratic Party, is formidable in 14%. And I mean, those carrying, so we got a Peasants League. Amazing that you still have those labels in the 20th century like that. And National Liberal Party. But you can see what they did say though, is they were, at least the communists were trying to, just like solidify and kind of just bring in all of the left or center parties there, trying to reach across party lines to get that.
A crushing defeat in the elections. Eisner, the Bavarian USPD leader, was assassinated by a right-wing terrorist just days later.
Ouch.
Listen, I know this looks bad, but I swear it was him. Rumors blamed another socialist leader who was then shot twice by one of Eisner's supporters while inside the parliament. Fighting broke out, killing 2 other members. Because of the chaos, Bavaria no longer had an effective government. The new socialist leader, Johannes Hoffmann, organized a new coalition government, but was overthrown by a group of communists who proclaimed Bavaria to be a Soviet republic. But this government was then overthrown by another communist group, who were then overthrown by the return of Hoffmann and several thousand soldiers and Freikorps, who brutally ended the Soviet republic.
Like the Roman political
600
crisis.
people were killed during the fighting, 300 of them civilians. After their victory, Freikorps executed at least 1,000 people suspect of being communist. Bavaria officially joined the Weimar Republic. The left was divided once more, and the chaos of the period made the state shift significantly to the right. In June 1919, the government signed the Treaty of Versailles, officially ending World War I. The treaty made Germany...
Amazing how all these, these events happen in such a short period of time. It seems like the amount of events you would have seen or would have expected, how violent they were, especially over like the entire interwar period. But no, this is just like within a year or two.
Announced sovereignty over its colonies and lose a large portion of territory. A part of Germany would be occupied for 15 years by the Allies, and they were forced to pay massive reparations. The
how this treaty goes.
No one even knew how to estimate. They also had to accept all guilt for the war and its consequences.
We're going to have another war.
All of this was incredibly upsetting for Germans, who despised the treaty, and those who signed it. But there was another demand. The treaty required Germany to demilitarize significantly.
Right.
And that meant that the Freikorps had to be disbanded.
So the demilitarization, something like they had like a 4.5 million man army. Now it's down to 100,000. No planes allowed, no tanks allowed, handful of ships. Completely gutted their military, which, was a source of pride for the kind of glory days of the German Empire, going back to like Bismarck and stuff like that. And that's stuff that guys like Hitler, who are obsessed with German history, found so offensive and so degrading and demeaning, and of course used that kind of stuff along with pretty much every provision of the Treaty of Versailles to rally people into political support, and then eventually into the actions that begin World War II.
In February 1920, Defense Minister Noske ordered the disbandment of two of the most powerful Freikorps divisions that were stationed near Berlin. These Freikorps were extremely opposed to Eber's democratic government, and their commander Erhard refused the dissolution. He reached out to his allies Wolfgang Kapp, Generals Walter Lüttwitz, Erich Ludendorff, and even Waldemar Pabst, the man responsible for the murders of Liebknecht and Luxemburg. Erhard ordered his brigade to march into Berlin and ruthlessly break any resistance. They carried swastikas on their helmets and vehicles, and it was here that it would become a symbol for anti-government and anti-Jewish sentiment. The city's defenders refused to fire on the soldiers, claiming that Reichswehr doesn't fire on Reichswehr. The government fled the city. With support from the troops and higher echelons of society, Kapp declared himself Chancellor.
Yep, it's only a very small part of the first story there. Stay tuned for part 2. I'll have to check if part 2 has come out. If it hasn't, I guess we'll keep an eye on it, and you're going to want to let me know. All right, final thoughts real quick before you go. All right, fantastic video, just from like an educational perspective. Well done from things I care about here. And completely aside from, drawing you in and hooking you with the oversimplified kind of style, very good. I learned a ton in this, right? Like I was saying, I knew kind of the broad events, but a lot of these very specific ones are shows me this was a lot more chaotic than even I thought it was, which I already thought it was incredibly chaotic here at the end of the war, and now transitioning to the post-war era. How much destabilization there actually was. And of course, in these types of scenarios are where some people can pick up those ashes, right? And you're going to see that with Adolf Hitler, which I assume is going to be probably a focus here, probably in part 2. But you can see the context there for how these movements can happen and the events that often precede them. So, all right, fantastic job there. Thanks to those that were suggesting this video. It's been in my kind of queue, and it's been in the video suggestions box for a while. So thanks to everyone that's been doing that. And yeah, looking forward to hopefully covering that again. Let me know, though, if you think I should make that a priority to make that number 2 happen. All right, with that, we'll see y'all next time. Bye.